The night had been quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest until you do something reckless just to feel alive again. Gemini didn't usually do reckless things, but tonight she found herself walking into a small bar she had passed a dozen times and never noticed. The neon sign flickered, casting uneven light across the sidewalk, and for a moment she hesitated. She told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more, but the tightness in her chest suggested otherwise. She wanted distraction, not disaster, but sometimes the two were impossible to separate. Inside, the room smelled faintly of polished wood and faint whiskey. The music wasn't loud, just enough to fill the spaces between conversations. She didn't belong here. Not really. But something about the anonymity of it drew her in. She walked past a few empty stools and chose a spot near the corner, the kind of place where people could see you but not notice you too closely. That's when she saw him. He was standing near the bar, talking quietly to the bartender, his presence impossible to ignore even from across the room. There was an energy about him that made Gemini's pulse skip. Not just attraction, though that was there, strong and immediate, but something sharper, something almost instinctive. He looked like a man who owned the air around him, yet his eyes carried a weight, a stillness that made people hesitate without realizing it. He didn't notice her staring. Or maybe he did and he chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, she felt a pull she didn't understand. She didn't plan to approach him. Gemini wasn't the type to chase a stranger. But when he finally turned just slightly and her eyes met his, something unspoken passed between them. She couldn't explain it, but it made her stomach twist in a way she hadn't felt in years. He came toward her, and there was no hesitation in his step and in the way he looked at her. When he stopped in front of her, he didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth lifted ever so slightly, like he already knew she would not resist him. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, his voice calm, low and steady. "No," Gemini said, and for the first time all evening she wasn't pretending to be indifferent. He sat, leaving enough space to be polite but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. They ordered drinks and conversation began, though neither of them rushed. It was easy. It was natural. He asked questions that weren't probing, just curious. She answered honestly in ways she rarely did with anyone. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning when he was near. He had a way of listening that made her feel seen, fully seen, without judgment. And then he laughed, softly, and it was so unexpected, so rare, that she turned her head to hide the sudden warmth spreading across her face. "Don't hide from me," he said, noticing the shift, his tone firm but not harsh. "I won't hurt you." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe a lot of things, but she told herself this was just a moment. Just one night. Nothing more. They left together. She didn't question it. Neither of them spoke much on the way. The air between them was charged with anticipation, an almost tangible pull that made every step toward each other feel inevitable. The night that followed was everything Gemini didn't expect. No dramatic confessions, no rushing declarations. Just a raw, unfiltered connection that made her forget about rules, about consequences, about everything but the moment. Ace was deliberate, attentive, and there was a gravity to him that made her feel like the only person in the world who mattered. When they finally separated in the morning, the air was heavy with things left unsaid, promises unspoken. Ace left without a word, no contact, no explanation. Gemini expected it. She expected nothing from him. And yet the emptiness he left behind felt unbearable. The next days were strange. She noticed small things. Her senses felt sharper, sounds clearer, shadows seemed to move differently. At first she dismissed it as coincidence, stress, or exhaustion. But deep down she knew it wasn't. Something had changed. She couldn't explain the dreams either. Images of a world she didn't know, faces she had never seen, and the pull of someone familiar she couldn't name. And then she saw him again in a place she shouldn't have. Just a fleeting glimpse at first, but enough to make her heart hammer and her chest tighten. He was near, closer than anyone should be without intention. Her pulse went out of control, not out of fear but out of recognition. Ace was not human. She knew it instantly, not from logic, but from the same instinct that had drawn her to him in the first place. Something about him, about his presence, commanded attention and demanded something she couldn't ignore. The realization made her stomach twist. Their night hadn't been casual. Not for him. And maybe not for her either. Everything about the ordinary life she had known, everything she had believed about control and independence, seemed suddenly fragile, meaningless even. Gemini tried to tell herself she was imagining it, that it was just desire and adrenaline, but every instinct screamed otherwise. She could feel it in her bones, in the steady, relentless tug of connection she couldn't resist, and in the quiet voice in her head that whispered his name, unbidden, unrelenting. And in that moment, standing alone in her apartment, staring at the remnants of the night, she understood the truth. Ace wasn't gone. He never truly left. The pull between them wasn't a mistake. It was something ancient, something binding, something she had no choice over even if she wanted it. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want to resist. Somewhere, Ace was out there, and the thought of him coming back didn't scare her. It made her heart race with anticipation, with longing, with something entirely new. Something dangerous. Something real. And Gemini, who had always thought she could choose her own path, realized that maybe, just maybe, some paths choose you. Gemini didn't expect to see him again. Not so soon, not like this, not in a place where the hum of normal life should have made everything feel ordinary. Yet there he was, standing at the entrance to the small law firm she worked for, the winter sun catching the sharp lines of his face, making him look impossible, like he'd stepped out of a world she had no right to enter. The one night she had tried to forget, the one night that had left her senses alive in ways she didn't understand, had returned. His eyes found hers immediately, steady, unwavering, and the air around him seemed to tighten, compress, pull at her chest with a weight she couldn't name. "Gemini," he said, voice low but carrying across the open office space. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't casual. It was a statement. A declaration. He was here and he wasn't leaving. She froze for a moment, unsure whether to run, hide, or stand her ground. Her instincts screamed all three at once, but her mind forced her to breathe, to think, to act like nothing had changed. "Ace," she said, her voice steady even though her pulse raced. "What are you doing here?" He walked toward her slowly, not a step wasted, not a movement casual. "I need to talk to you," he said simply. There was authority in the tone, but it wasn't commanding her to obey. It was claiming a right she hadn't yet understood she had given him. She wanted to ask why he had come back, what had changed, and what power drew him to her after everything. But before she could, he was close enough that the heat of him pressed against her in a way that made the rest of the world vanish. She remembered the night they had shared, the intensity, the clarity, the undeniable connection, and suddenly it wasn't just a memory. It was here, alive again, in the way he looked at her, the way he moved around her, and the way she could feel his presence as clearly as her own heartbeat. "I need you to understand something," he said, his eyes sharp, unyielding. "What happened between us, it wasn't a mistake. Not for me. Not for you." Gemini bristled, crossing her arms. "You don't even know me." The words came out sharper than intended, more defensive than confrontational. But she couldn't help it. Something about his presence made her vulnerable, and vulnerability was dangerous. She didn't do vulnerability well. "I know enough," he replied quietly. "Enough to know that there's a bond between us. A bond you don't fully understand yet. And I need you to see it before it changes everything." Her stomach twisted. She had spent days trying to convince herself that what had happened was just a fleeting night, something separate from her life, a memory she could file away. But every instinct, every sense she had, told her otherwise. She could feel it in her chest, in her pulse, and in the unsteady way her hands trembled. "And what if I don't want it to change?" she asked, her voice steadier now, though her body betrayed her. Ace's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, enough to make her heart squeeze. Then it hardened again. "You won't have a choice. Not entirely. Not if you stay near me." Gemini's brow furrowed. "Stay near you? I work here. I'm living my life. How does that even—" She stopped herself. She had heard rumors before, stories whispered by older lawyers about the unusual men who came through the city, men with influence and presence that couldn't be explained. She had always dismissed them as exaggeration, but now she felt it firsthand. Ace wasn't normal. Not even remotely. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him, and she wanted to step back, but she didn't. Part of her didn't want to. "You're not human," she said, almost as a statement, not a question. He didn't blink. Didn't flinch. "And you're part of something you haven't discovered yet. Something that matters." Her pulse spiked, not from fear, but from a combination of disbelief and fascination. She had always been independent and had always prided herself on being in control. But Ace was the first person who made her feel like control was an illusion. The first person who made her question everything she had believed about life, about choice, and about what she was capable of. "I don't understand," she admitted finally. "I don't understand any of this." "Then I'll show you," he said. His voice was firm, certain, and not impatient, but carrying the weight of inevitability. He was making a choice she wasn't ready for, forcing her to confront something she had ignored her whole life. And then, as though confirming everything she feared, he placed his hand on hers. Just a touch, and yet it burned through her in a way she couldn't explain. Her instincts screamed, telling her that this man was more than dangerous, more than commanding, more than any human should be. But the part of her that had felt him before, that had shared that one night, recognized it instantly. "You have power," he said quietly, almost a whisper. "More than you know. More than anyone knows. And it's tied to me, to what we share. That's why I came back." Gemini's mind whirled. "Power? What are you talking about?" He looked at her then, his gaze locking onto hers in a way that made the world narrow down to nothing but the space between them. "It doesn't matter if you understand it yet. What matters is that it's real. And it will change everything if you ignore it." Her chest tightened. She felt both pulled and pushed, drawn to him and wary of him, aware that the bond between them was stronger than reason. And she realized something dangerous. She wanted him here. He wanted this connection. She wanted to understand, even if it meant letting her life unravel. Then, without warning, he leaned closer, his forehead brushing hers for just a moment. Not intimate in a casual sense, but intimate in a way that left no room for denial. "You're not just tied to me," he said. "You're central. And if you choose to stay close, everything will change." Gemini swallowed hard, the words sinking into her chest like stones. Her independence, her carefully constructed life, and her sense of safety, they all hung in the balance now. And yet, for the first time, she didn't step back. "I'll stay," she said quietly, meaning it in ways she didn't yet fully understand. "But I decide how and when and why." Ace's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, but the fire in his eyes remained. "I wouldn't have it any other way," he said. And in that moment, Gemini realized the truth she had been avoiding. The night they shared had never been just a night. It was a beginning. A beginning she could no longer escape. And Ace was back, not just in her life but in her world, claiming a place that she couldn't ignore no matter how fiercely she tried. The pull between them was no longer just physical. It was something older, something undeniable, something that would change the rules of everything she thought she knew about herself, about him, and about the life she had lived so carefully until now. Somewhere deep inside, Gemini felt a spark of excitement that scared her as much as it thrilled her. Because she knew without a doubt that nothing would ever be the same again. Gemini had never felt so exposed in her life. Not in a courtroom, not under the glare of her colleagues, not even during nights when she had allowed herself fleeting moments of vulnerability. But standing in Ace's world, his world which suddenly felt both vast and intimate, she was raw in ways she hadn't anticipated. He was there as always, watching, guiding, and yet letting her find her own footing. Ace had returned not just to claim a place in her life, but to reveal truths she had been shielded from. Her nights were no longer ordinary. Her instincts, her senses, even her heartbeat seemed to pulse with a rhythm that belonged to something bigger than herself. "You have to understand," Ace said, his tone steady, commanding, yet threaded with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "This isn't just about us. It's bigger than that. The pack, the realm, everything shifts the moment you step forward." Gemini looked at him, trying to reconcile the man she had known for a single impossible night with the one who now stood before her, holding not only her gaze but the weight of an entire world. "I don't even know what that means," she admitted. "I've never asked for this. I never wanted this." He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He just studied her for a long moment, and she realized he wasn't here to convince her. He was here to challenge her. "You've always had the power," he said. "You just didn't know it yet. And now the choice is yours. Hide or step into it." Gemini's chest tightened. She had spent her life in control, steering every choice carefully, avoiding anything that might destabilize the life she had built. But everything Ace had shown her, the pull she felt, the instinct she couldn't explain, the bond that tethered her to him, had shifted her perception of control. There was no going back. "I can't," she whispered, the words trembling more to herself than to him. "I can't just take it all on." "You're not alone," Ace said, stepping closer, his hand brushing hers. The touch was firm, grounding, yet not possessive. It was the first time she felt not just seen, but counted as an equal, a partner, someone who mattered in ways that went beyond desire. "I'll be with you. Every step. But you have to claim it for yourself. Not for me. For you." Her stomach knotted and her pulse surged. She wanted to argue, to deny the gravity of what he was saying, but something inside her knew it was true. This wasn't about submission. This wasn't about being claimed. This was about choice, the kind she hadn't allowed herself until now. And she wanted it. More than she had ever allowed herself to want anything. The Alpha Council had gathered before she even realized it. Powerful men and women, their gazes heavy, expectant, and in some cases wary. They watched her, gauging her reactions, waiting to see if she would falter. But Gemini didn't falter. She drew in a deep breath, feeling Ace's presence behind her like an anchor, and stepped forward into the room with her chin lifted, her body steady, her resolve clear. "This changes everything," one of the elders said, voice low and cautious. "Choosing to align with him, with the Alpha King, it will disrupt the order." Gemini turned to face them, meeting each gaze without flinching. "I'm not here to disrupt. I'm here to take responsibility. For what I am and for what I can be. If that changes your order, then perhaps it was never fixed to begin with." A murmur ran through the room. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others stiffened, clearly skeptical. Ace's eyes softened just slightly, a shadow of pride and something deeper, something she recognized instantly: relief. "You understand, don't you?" he whispered when the council wasn't looking. "This isn't just about me wanting you. This is about everything you've never known about yourself. About us." "I understand enough," she said. "Enough to know I won't run. Not from this, not from you, not from anything anymore." He nodded once, sharply. The kind of nod that meant trust, respect, and unspoken acknowledgement. They were aligned now, not as master and subordinate, not as claimant and claimed, but as partners, as equals navigating a world neither had anticipated. And then came the final test. A challenge from the council, a subtle one but potent. They wanted to see if Gemini's presence would destabilize Ace or if their bond would falter under scrutiny. Ace didn't hesitate, but Gemini didn't shrink either. She stepped fully into her awareness, into her power, and the room shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching closely, but it was there. She had stepped forward, and in doing so she had changed the balance. Ace's eyes darkened slightly, not with anger but with admiration, and the unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. She belonged beside him, not beneath him. The council fell silent. They could see it now. This was not a human woman being claimed. This was a force, a presence, a partner in something far bigger than desire alone. And Ace, the Alpha King, finally exhaled fully, the tension leaving his body. He had not surrendered. He had not given in. He had simply found the one person who could stand beside him and make the world, his world, whole again. When the room cleared, they were alone. Gemini exhaled, tension leaving her in slow waves. Ace stepped close, placing a hand against her cheek, brushing a strand of hair aside. There was no rush, no possession, just presence, care, and acknowledgement. "You're remarkable," he said softly, almost reverently. "And you're relentless," she replied, a small smile breaking across her face. The warmth in her chest spread, not just from him, but from knowing she had claimed her own path. "You're mine," he said, but this time it was different. It wasn't a claim of power. It was a claim of truth, of connection, of choice. "And I'm yours," she said, returning the weight of the words, steady, unwavering. Not forced, not demanded. They didn't need anything else. Not words, not proof, not ceremony. They had each other. And for the first time, everything else felt like it had always been waiting for this moment. Outside, the world went on, unaware of the shift that had occurred inside. Inside, a bond had been sealed, a destiny claimed, and a partnership forged that neither distance nor power nor fear could undo. Ace pulled her close, and this time she didn't hesitate. She rested her head against him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart, the warmth of his presence, and the certainty that they had stepped into something neither of them could ever walk away from. Gemini had chosen. Ace had chosen. And together they had begun something that neither time nor fate could undo. It wasn't just a night and it wasn't just a return. It was a beginning. And in that beginning they were unstoppable.